Okay, so we're here at Celebration 5 with Daniel Wallace, the author of the Jedi Path. It's an incredible book. And can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm here at Celebration 5, and this is the first time I've actually seen the finished product. I wrote this book, but really I did a fraction of the actual work, because the actual real work is in the design, and that's what I think is really complete. So it comes in this case, and the book's inside the case, right? So here's the little flyer that they're giving out. So it says this, but this is the goods, right? So it opens, you got the Jedi Path, you got this, you've got all these removables, there's a braid, there's a coin, there's a thing, it's available September 28th, right? That's the promotional thing, but they actually have this. Now, I'm really familiar with the text because I wrote it, but I was not familiar with the box until I got here. And so I was thrilled to be able to do this. So this is really cool. So
That is so cool.
the unveiling is just amazing. And I talked to Jonathan Rinsler at Lucasfilm about that sound that you heard when it rises. And they said it's a combination of a bunch of sounds. There's some sort of droid sound, like a droid servo motor sound. There's a little bit of an R2 sound at the end. There was a Death Star blast door sound at the beginning. And it's a mashup of sounds that they actually got from the library, the Lucasfilm Sound Library. So you do that, and it looks like it's rising up on an anti-gravity cushion or something, right? And here it is. But part of just to say what the project was, initially was a textbook for Jedi, right? So people who want to become Jedi or are members of the Jedi Order and live in the Jedi Temple, what kind of textbook would they carry around with them? And the distinction is, it's not an essential guide, which has the big Star Wars logo on the front of it, and it has, a UPC code on the back of it and all that, and it says, from, Del Rey or something like that. That's, it can be written in universe, but it's still a product of a publisher, right? This was, the whole idea was, let's make something that really feels like it's an artifact, like it's an actual book that was actually used by actual Star Wars characters and actually came through an actual wormhole and landed in our actual universe, right? So we really tried to do that as much as possible. So the case is part of it, right? The book is part of it, because the book feels old, the case feels new, and the sort of, melding of the old and the new is something that Star Wars does, often. Yeah. And then you get the book, and, if you feel this, it's like a faux leather sort of a soft really cover. It's hardcover, but it's bendable. It's a little bit like a Moleskine sort of notebook thing, and it's supposed to feel very old, and you can see the sides of there's not even a barcode, right? And there's not even my name, right? Really nice. So, because there shouldn't be, right? I shouldn't even be identified as the author because I didn't write it, the Jedi, right? But you see, like the pages sort of have a weathering effect, so it's supposed to feel like it's old. So that was sort of the next bit was, how do you write the text?
Yeah, so I mean, it's called the Jedi Path, and I know you said it's supposed to be in universe. If a Jedi wrote it, what exactly does it cover? What's the book about?
So it's an interesting question, because what would the Jedi have as a textbook? And this is kind of and also what would people want to buy? As a fan guide. So you need it kind of to cover a lot of things. If I'm a fan and I want to buy a book about the Jedi, well, I want to know about the Force. I want to know about lightsabers. I want to know about the history of the Jedi. I want to know about the Sith, right? So you kind of have to do all those things. So my assumption was that this is a primer textbook that they carry around. It's very simple. It's very top knowledge, but you need to know everything in here. And then when they go into their advanced studies, then you get your trigonometry textbook or something, right? So this is a primer, but it covers everything. So it would be like the first thing you get or something. It's more of a keepsake than it is anything. It's like your yearbook almost, right? So the idea was, in contents, there's an introduction, then there's all the things that you need to know if you're a Jedi Initiative or Youngling or Jedi student or whatever you call that. So the clans, and here's the 3 pillars of the Jedi, right? What about becoming a Padawan? How do you become an apprentice? The apprentice trials, right? What if you don't become a Padawan? We've seen that in the expanded universe with the agricultural corps, for example. So getting into that whole thing, and what do you need to study when you're a kid? Right? What are the most important Force abilities that you learn and then you get more detailed later on? and then you get into Jedi Knight and a little bit of advanced stuff about Jedi Masters, and when you get more advanced. So this was the overview. Now, to do this and make it not be boring, it was my thing. I didn't want it to be a rehash of like the essential guide to the Force,
Okay.
So I wanted to write it, and it's a textbook, right? So I wanted to write it in universe. So I actually came up with a list of like 7 Jedi Masters who would have written the text. Like here's this section was written by Grandmaster Faye Coven. And this would have been one of the 7. I made up backstories for each one of the 7 and who they were and what they're all about and what their tone of voice was. And the idea here is for fans that are really into the EU is that the text of this book was written about 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, or after the Rusan reformations, right? So after the defeat of the Sith, about 10 years after that, the Jedi have already kind of reconstituted themselves, right, after the war. A lot of the Jedi who wrote this fought in the war, but they've gone far enough that they're like, this is the new way we're doing things. And this was sort of written as, we're laying down the law for the next 1,000 years. And this kept being reprinted and reprinted and reprinted to new classes of Jedi over the next 1,000 years. And this copy, which is supposedly the only surviving copy that's left in the universe, is the last copy. Would have been printed, maybe, I actually looked at the timeline, would have been printed about 100 years before the movie, more or less. And it would have, this copy was given to Yoda, and Yoda kind of went through it because he was an adult. He didn't use it as a student, right? He went through it and he made some comments and, hey, I don't like this part. Like, maybe he was thinking of reprinting it and it never got done, right? So Yoda had it, and then he gave it to Thames Cerulean. So EU fans know that in the books, Thames Cerulean was Dooku's master.
Right.
So I wanted to create a chain, but I wanted to put in some stuff that maybe was a little bit more expanded universe centric. So that's a great example. Most people look at this and they're like, "Who's that?" So, but Yoda made the comments, and then he ended up giving it to Thames Cerulean when he was a kid. So most of these comments are written in the book, which I kind of spoiled it, but there's comments here, well, I'll get to it in a second, but they actually graffitied the book. All these people graffitied the book. So Thames Cerulean did the thing. Then his student was Dooku, so when he got older, he gave it to Dooku, and Dooku wrote some stuff in it. Dooku's student was Qui-Gon, Qui-Gon's student was Obi-Wan, Obi-Wan's student was Anakin, Anakin's student was Ahsoka. After Ahsoka, this book was, the Jedi Temple was destroyed. The Emperor somehow recovered it, right? This would have been, I don't know how he got it because we don't know what happens to Ahsoka, right? But somehow he gets it, and Darth Sidious gets it, and he makes some comments in here like, ha ha ha, He's very gloating, right? And then presumably, I forget exactly what year I was thinking this was, but Luke found it pretty late in the game because he doesn't have a book like this when he's setting up the Jedi Academy, right? So I wrote that he found it very late. Here's a note that I wrote from Luke explaining the whole thing. I dated it to 24 years after the Battle of Yavin was my time. So then, and then month 3, day 7, which is my birthday. So
cool.
This is the Easter egg. Yeah. And then he's talking about this, and then he explains how they all got it. And for super fans, I actually put in which years they had it. Luke believes, he did a little scholarship on it. I believe they held it this long, and then this long, and then this long, and that's what's really cool. It was my math, right? So then let me just show you the details then.
Yeah, sure.
The whole narrative becomes, here's a different person, Restily Quist, Chief Librarian. She has a point of view. She's talking about the history of the Jedi Order. Now, is her perspective the right perspective? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it depends on your point of view, right? So Yoda, he's not crazy about it. Dooku's making a snarky comment. Anakin's like, well, what's going on here? Why are you? What's your opinion on the dark side? And then Ahsoka's like, I don't understand why you're all arguing about this because there's a war on it, right? So there's all these little snarky comments that keep going on of people making stuff. And then this is a good example of the whole weathered look is there was pages in here, and we always knew we were going to do this. And this was supposed to be the prophecy of the chosen one was going to go here, right? It even says somewhere in here that this is the prophecy of the chosen one. And we knew we were going to take it out, right? That was the whole thing, was there would be missing pages. We didn't want people who bought it to get freaked that somebody ripped it. Vandals, kids got to it, right? So you can put in a note from Luke saying, hey, don't worry, these pages were already torn out when the book came into my possession. But with the presumption is maybe Sidious took it out for some reason. And I actually wrote a section of text to go on these pages because there is a snippet here, and I didn't want it to look weird. I didn't want it to be dummy text. So I wrote a section, and we didn't use it, and we took it out.
So it'll probably never be made public?
It'll probably be never made public. I don't think they'll let me release what I wrote.
It's still interesting.
It went to everybody, and Lucasfilm saw it and all that, but we kind of always knew that we weren't going to do it. And they're kind of protective of the prophecy of the chosen one. Specifically, I think they have some plans for that prophecy coming up, potentially. But and I'm reading that into it based on their reaction, like, oh, you guys can't do that. Okay. Usually when Lucasfilm says you can't do something, there's a reason why you can't do something, right? So there might be something there. So that one's gone. But they're all making those comments, and then all these guys come back and they sort of do it. But you go into things like the lightsaber, you go into things like different combat stances, and you go into things like working with your master. Here's advanced lightsaber combat style. This is using a Temple's analysis chamber. Here's species in the Republic that you need to understand. This is some great art by Episode 1 concept artist Tara Whitlatch. Did this art for force-wielding animals, like
the
Vornsker is in there, and then I said, the Jedi would presumably know about this because in the EU they had blockaded Mirkir, right? And so I set it up that they talk about it in here, but they never reveal the name of the planet. So like they need to know that they're trying to tell students, watch out, there's stuff out there that's dangerous, and this is why. But they don't want people to go there. They don't want this to fall into the wrong hands. So the planet's location is, of course, classified. And that kind of leads me to my last thing on this, is that there's removables, right? So you already seen this. This is a map of the Jedi Temple, and it's sort of an origami map that folds out, and it reveals, really cool. How you different locations. And then we put in a lot of souvenirs. It's almost like a memory book that you put like a flower in or something like that, right? But it's a Jedi thing, so you would save stuff in it. So this was a fun one. This was a napkin, right? And it's a napkin from Dex's Diner, that says, and it has coffee stains on it, right? But the guy who always goes to Dex's Diner, obviously, is Obi-Wan. He knows what's going on there. Right. So one day he was in Dex's Diner and he starts noodling around and designing a lightsaber that he really wants. And he thinks it's such a good design that he's like, I gotta save this, I'm gonna need it later. So sometimes, you always have the thing of people drawing a business plan on the back of an envelope, right? So this was Obi-Wan's thing, and he puts it in here, like in the lightsaber section. Really I'm coming back to that. Here's another example of this is our version of a Jedi credit, which was minted for Corellian Jedi. Originally we were going to have a face on here because the description says that they have a face, but it looked really bad, and so Lucasfilm decided not to do a face. But the idea is this is Jedi credit. Which one of the Jedis is Corellian? None of them, as far as I know. So I made Thane Cerulean, the Corellian, right? So we can include a Jedi credit, and it would still fit within the EU as what we know as the only the Jedi who actually use Jed credits are Corellian Jedi. So there's little tidbits like that in here. Even this was a Padawan braid that you'd have this, and we saw in the cartoon when they're knighted, they flick the lightsaber and it cuts off the braid. What do you do with it? I think you keep it, right? It's a souvenir, right? So
Anakin gave his to Padme, I believe.
Anakin gave his to Padme, so this couldn't be Anakin's. So, but I wanted it to be somebody. I didn't want it to be Thane Cerulean's again. So this is Qui-Gon's.
Wow, that's really
So
cool.
We set it up so it could be somebody famous that you would know. This is Qui-Gon's. And this was another fun one we thought of. We have a section in here about, if you're not just a Jedi Knight, but if you're a starfighter pilot, or you could be a soldier, you could be like a demolitions expert. I mean, there's stuff that the Jedi do that you don't know. right? Because they're a big organization, and this was written at the height of their power. One of the things was Starfighter Corps. So this was something we read about called the Jedi Aces, and then they have a patch, and that there's an emblem of this. This one was conceived as a patch used by the Jedi Aces that one of the